I was at a photography conference a couple weeks ago, and one of the speakers talked about the rule of thirds and that we should think of it in terms of depth and not just two dimensions. So it ends up being you end up thinking about your photograph as something like a Rubik's cube. And I thought, oh man, what a brilliant idea. So I want to sketch it out and show you here on this photo how it works. So you're already familiar with the rule of thirds in terms of dividing your photograph into three vertical sections and three horizontal sections. Sorry, this is going to be a little bit messy trying to write on my screen. So we're already familiar with the rule of thirds, and it just helps you to sort of organize your photograph, organize the composition. You can kind of line things up. So you notice, for example, in this photo that the dog here is placed right in the center, and then the two people playing catch, this one guy here is basically taking up this horizontal section. This guy over here, he's not taking up the whole section because he's in the background, but basically, when you think it in terms of the rule of thirds, it just gives you places to put things in the photograph. But look what happens when we start to add dimension to the rule of thirds. Now, the first thing I want to point out as I draw this is that I'm making it look three-dimensional here in the drawing, and it's actually sort of a little bit inaccurate. Like, we shouldn't really be looking at this photograph on an angle. We should be looking kind of straight into it, but it's the only way for me to illustrate this for you. So basically, when I'm finished drawing this, we would want to sort of turn the cube so that we're not seeing the top and we're not seeing the side, but you'll see what I mean here. So we're going to draw this out so that all of our thirds have depth to them. I hope that my amazing sketching skills here are not making you jealous. Okay, so then we're going to think about the rule of thirds in terms of depth, and we're going to think about foreground, middle ground, background, that sort of thing. So I'm going to switch my color here. We'll go to blue. So first of all, notice that the boy in the foreground, in terms of two dimensions, he's taking up this amount of height, and he's taking up some width along here. And basically, he belongs to this cube here, and he belongs to this cube here, basically these three cubes in the foreground. He takes up that whole vertical panel of height, but he takes up that bit of depth. The dog is actually in the very middle cube. We actually can't see it here, but basically, if you start with this cube here, actually, let me change the color so it stands out. We'll make the dog, let's make the dog this orange here. So the dog is in here, but he's in the middle ground, basically. So if you start at this cube here and this cube here, and you work your way in toward the center of the cube, he's right inside, right in the very center of the Rubik's Cube. And then the guy who's more in the background, we'll make him green. We're seeing him in this cube here, but he's actually way back here in this cube on the top and in the very back. Now, I know technically there is the horizon way back there in the background, but the sky is so dull and the horizon is so uninteresting. It's not really part of the photograph. It's technically there. You technically see it. But realistically, what we're actually looking at in this photograph is the boy in the foreground, the dog in the middle, and the guy in the background. They're playing catch, and the dog is kind of running back and forth trying to get the ball. So I just thought that this was such a cool concept because our photographs are two-dimensional. We have height and we have width, or height and length, or width and height, whatever two dimensions you want to call them. And the way that we portray depth in our photographs is usually with light. Light and shadow can help you to give the impression of depth in your photograph. The same as in a sketch or a painting. Light and shadow is really what gives you depth. But this scene is pretty flat. It was overcast, and so light and shadow isn't really going to give us depth. But size or scale, we see the boy in the foreground. We can tell he's in the foreground because he's larger. And in real life, if he was standing beside the guy in the photo, he would be shorter than the guy. He'd be smaller than the guy, quite a bit smaller. And the dog would be smaller than them as well. But when you look at the photograph, you can tell by the size difference that he is in the foreground, the dog is in the middle. We also have the leading line of the beach that gives us some depth. So lines can give depth to a photo as well, a path or a road winding through your photograph, some kind of vanishing point, something like that. But then you might say, yeah, but how am I going to lay out this depth? And so if you think about the rule of thirds three-dimensionally, it can help you to look at your photograph and say, okay, two-dimensionally, how am I going to lay this out? But then adding the third dimension, how might I want to adjust my perspective here so that I really make use of those three dimensions? This was such a cool idea. Gave me a whole new shelf space of creativity or composition in my mind. So now when I set out to make photographs, I am totally thinking about depth in a new way. I'm thinking about the rule of thirds in a new way. I'm thinking about depth in a new way, and I'm connecting those two. And I'm finding it's really fun when I'm out there. If you find this helpful, drop a comment. Actually, I don't think you can post images, but maybe you can post a link to an image if you actually go out and practice this.